Stephen, welcome to Edinburgh. Here we are in the Business School of the University of Edinburgh, and it's great that you've come as part of the Asia Scotland Institute series of Adam Smith economic briefings. And welcome, so good to have you here. You've come to launch your book in Scotland when the money runs out, and perhaps I could start by asking what prompted you to write this book that has just appeared?
Well, partly because the Western world has really succumbed to remarkably low rates of growth over the last few years.
Yeah.
And the question I wanted to ask was not so much, how do we recover, but what happens if we don't really recover? What happens if the growth rates we're going through currently are here to stay? And if they are here to stay, what are the difficult political and social decisions that we have to make in the years ahead? So I was also particularly keen to demonstrate the importance of history, because economists, I think, tend to focus on their mathematical models and their quantitative models, but they're often based just on data from the last 10, 20, 30 years, as opposed to the long run of economic and political history, which I think in many ways is very illuminating for where we are today.
Your earlier book, Losing Control, another great title, was it a prequel to this? Did that lay some of the groundwork that you're now developing?
To a certain degree, because the argument in Losing Control was very much about the idea that the rise of the emerging nations was not such a positive thing for the Western world as people had often assumed. There were all sorts of consequences for income distribution, wealth distribution that perhaps hadn't been quite so helpful for Western growth. This goes a stage further and says, well, given the evidence we now have of weaker Western growth, what do we now do about it? What are the issues that we have to try and deal with in the years ahead?
One of the things you talk about, I know, is the need to deal with global creditors.
Yes.
Can you touch on that a little bit?
Well, part of the problem is, in one sense, a Victorian problem. Back in the Victorian period, there was always this assumption that debtors were bad people and creditors were good people. But of course, in reality, they're simply two sides of the same coin. And we can see this very, very clearly in the Eurozone currently. The debtors in Southern Europe are really suffering. The creditors in Northern Europe, if you like, want to avoid paying any of the bill for
like the Germans.
Like Germany, for example. They want to avoid paying the bill for the financial crisis. But of course, you look at, again, through history, it turns out that often both debtors and creditors have to adjust. The important thing here really is to try to encourage those countries which run very, very large balance of payments, current account surpluses, to think twice about what they're doing with the money that they're basically investing abroad, because that investment has in many cases been instrumental in sparking financial bubbles and all the credit meltdowns we've seen more recently.
Another theme I think you're going to talk to us about that's in your book is demographics. Whether this is a youth dividend or an age problem, that's clearly a huge feature of global economics at the moment.
It is, and I think part of the issue with debt is that it's very helpful for the current generation of boomers who've frankly done really rather well over the last 20 or 30 years. So one of my big issues is really trying to work out a new social contract to look after the interests of those who are more youthful rather than those who are somewhat more mature.
Here we are in a business school in a city where Adam Smith, actually he lived but also died. I know you attach a lot of importance to the teaching of economics.
Yes.
Which will be a great pleasure to some of the economic professors here. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? You touch on that in your book.
Yes, I think in one sense the problem with the teaching of economics is that it focuses very much on the quantitative aspects, the mathematical aspects, and economics graduates coming through today are often mathematical geniuses, which is absolutely wonderful. But I'd like to see a bit more knowledge of history, of political economy and social economy, because ultimately economics is, in one sense, a slave to politics, and economic events certainly have an influence on political events, but political events equally have a big impact on economic events. And knowing a bit more about the history of all this, I think is very important. And certainly in the book I talk about the 29 crash, the Great Depression, the austerity in Britain in the 1920s, even going back as far as the French Revolution and the Peasants' Revolt. They're all examples, in one sense, of economic difficulties which have led to political upheaval, and that's really my issue for where we are today as well.
One of our mantras at the Asia Scotland Institute is that, particularly in Scotland, tomorrow's leaders need to understand the markets they're going to operate in.
Yes.
That understanding not only the culture but also the business environment is critically important. Would you subscribe to that?
Yes, I would. I mean, the world is changing enormously. 20 or 30 years ago, most people hadn't even thought about China as a major economy. It's now the second biggest economy in the world. It's rapidly having an influence on economies elsewhere. It's creating winners and losers elsewhere in the world. It's creating opportunities for exporters to get into China. But what is extraordinary about the UK in particular is if you look at the ranking of exporters to China currently, the UK ranks 22nd, which is really suggesting we haven't grabbed the opportunities that may exist in China.
But there is an opportunity clearly for us to grab.
Absolutely, yes.
And finally, Stephen, what's the sort of the takeaway that you'd like those who come and listen to you and buy your book to take away with them, as it were, in terms of thinking?
Well, the most important thing, of course, is to buy the book. But beyond that, I think it is important to realise that beyond the austerity versus stimulus debate, there's a whole bunch of structural issues out there, a whole bunch of political issues, and I think the sort of punch and Judy role of austerity versus stimulus doesn't quite capture the issues we really are facing today.
Stephen King, Global Chief Economist of HSBC, and his new book, When the Money Runs Out, launched here in Edinburgh today. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.